So, you want to write a novel, but you're not 100% sure where to start. Or maybe you're deep in the outlining process, but you're feeling constrained by the hero's journey, or frustrated by the rigid beats of Save the Cat. Well, today, we're diving into the Story Circle, a flexible, character-focused outlining tool that might just be the key to unlocking your next masterpiece. Welcome to another episode of Just-in-Time Worldbuilding with your host, Marie Mullaney. Today, we're exploring story circles and my personal interpretation of how to use them to outline a novel. Before we get into it, I just want to address one elephant in the room. Story structures like the hero's journey, Save the Cat, and even the story circle are great tools, but only if you don't let them box you in. These tools help design your plot and guide your thinking process, but they're not supposed to be a straitjacket. They're there to help you focus and refine your ideas, not hurt your creativity. So don't get married to any given structure, not even mine. The outlining process I'm sharing with you today is one I've developed over time because it works for me, and just like my world building process, which I've covered in an earlier video, check out the info card, it is an iterative process that works with my creative process. So take this process and make it your own. Use what you like, add what you want, throw away what doesn't work for you. It's just a tool. Okay, enough of that. Let's dive into the history of story structure. Understanding where these models come from can help us see how they've evolved over time and how they might work for your writing. Let's start with the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell popularized this monomyth in his 1949 book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Campbell studied myths from cultures all over the world and identified recurring stages in heroic tales, things like the call to adventure, the ordeal, and the return. But here's the thing, Campbell wasn't writing a how-to guide for authors. He was analyzing myths. It wasn't until later, when writers like Christopher Vogler adapted the hero's journey for Hollywood screenwriting, that it became the structure we recognize today. Fast forward to 2005, when Blake Snyder introduced a method called Save the Cat. This method focuses on screenplays and condenses a story into 15 beats. While this can be incredibly helpful, especially for beginner writers who need a clear structure, it has been criticized for making stories feel formulaic. I mean, 15 beats are 15 beats. How much you gonna do with that to vary it up? You know what I'm saying? Then we come to Dan Harmon, the creator of Rick and Morty, who developed the story circle. Harmon took Campbell's monomyth and simplified it into 8 steps with a focus on character transformation. Harmon wanted something intuitive and flexible, something that didn't feel like a rigid checklist, and in my opinion, that's why the story circle is such a great tool for novelists, especially if you write character-focused stories. Now, that being said, I use an iterative process, as I said. My process actually starts with a modified Save the Cat outline to get the basic structure and key beats of the story. Then I take that outline as input into the story circle, where I focus on deepening the character arcs and refining the emotional core of the story. And that's the process I'm going to take you through now. First, let's talk about my Tentpoles, what I modified from Save the Cat. So before I dive into the details of character journeys, I like to define a loose, high-level structure for my stories. This happens at the plot level, at a very broad scale. I divide my tentpoles into 3 sections, which loosely align with the 3 acts of a typical story structure. The first section is the introductory phase, and it includes these 3 key tentpoles. 1. The world in a steady state. What does the world look like before the story begins? This is where we establish the everyman moments of the characters, their ordinary world. I jot this down as a simple 1-sentence description to define what the world looks like in its equilibrium. And then the second tentpole is the catalyst for action. What disrupts the steady state? What pushes the characters out of their comfort zones and sets the story into motion? And then the third tentpole is the point of no return. This is separate from the catalyst. The catalyst might introduce the conflict, but the point of no return is when the characters fully commit to the journey ahead. It's the moment when they can't go back to their old life. So that's the first phase. The second phase is then the learning phase. Here, I divide this phase into 2 parts with a middle tentpole. The first is reacting. At the start of this phase, the characters are reacting to events. The antagonists are acting, the world is acting, and the protagonists are scrambling to keep up. What is the world throwing at them? How are they coping? And that leads us to the midpoint climax tentpole, which is the second tentpole in this phase. And this is where we raise the stakes. We introduce a ticking time clock or a driving tension that is introduced if it hasn't already been established. The characters must act or risk losing everything. Their coffee shop will go under. Their town will fall to the empire. Mount Doom will explode. In short, the world as they know it will end. And that leads us to the second part of this phase, acting. Here the protagonists stop reacting and start taking the initiative. They've learned from their earlier experiences and are actively pushing forward to achieve their goal. And at the end of that, it goes into the climax phase. Here we again have our 3 tentpoles. The first is the false overcome. This is the character's first attempt at victory. They think they've figured out how to win, but they fail, leading to the next tentpole, all hope is lost. The characters face their darkest hour. Everything seems impossible, and they question whether they can succeed at all. And then the turning point reignites the character's resolve. They find a new solution or perspective that allows them to overcome the challenge of the story. And this leads to the final resolution where the characters live in the world that they've shaped. So I personally always learn by doing. So let's go through an example. For a title, let's go with Equations for Rain. Equations is a story about a herd of elephants who have a civilization built on using maths as a magic system. Now, I want the story to be about the theme of should you adapt to the environment or force the environment to adapt to you, with minor themes of acceptance versus forging your own way. Okay, so with that in mind, let's define some tentpoles for Equations for Rain. In the introduction phase, I might have the following tentpoles. First, the world in the steady state. The elephants live in harmony with the savanna around them. Second tentpole, catalyst for action. A drought ravages the savanna, disrupting the elephants' peaceful existence. Then, the point of no return. A fire caused by the drought destroys large swaths of the savanna. Our protagonists set out to find a solution. So now we're in the learning phase of the story. And our fourth tentpole is reacting. A male and a female elephant travel together seeking a solution to the drought. They learn about an equation that can alter the environment, breaking the drought while encountering challenges in the drought-stricken land. Then our midpoint climax is the fifth tentpole, and here the protagonists learn that empowering this equation could harm the biodiversity of the savanna. But they decide to push forward with the equation anyway, since they believe the savanna will eventually recover. From this point on, they carry on into the acting period. The protagonists gather components for the ritual. They meet a wise beetle who has adjusted to the drought conditions. And the female protagonist starts wondering if they should rather adapt the elephants than adapt the environment. Okay, once they have everything they need for the ritual, the climax beckons. And for the seventh tentpole, the false overcome, our protagonists start the ritual, and as they initiate this final action, the female realizes the equation would impose permanent dominance over the environment. The elephants will never live in harmony with the savannah again. The female withdraws from the ritual, leading to 8. All hope is lost. The male fights her, claiming that she is killing her people, and she accepts that mantle of villainy. But this is not where we want to leave the story, so we go to 9, the turning point in resolution, where the wise beetle advises the female to change the spell and rather than adapt to the environment, change the elephants. Weakened from the fight, the female finds enough strength to enact this altered ritual. The elephants are changed to survive, but they reject the female, labeling her as a villain and the bull as a hero. So this example is very high level and there are tons of details missing. As it is right now, it's a very blunt story. But that's the point of Tentpoles. They give you a broad overview of what you're aiming at and the thematic components of your story without diving deep into the nuances. Now, once I have my tentpoles in place, I use them as a guide to map out my character's journey using the story circles. By the way, if you want to ask me detailed questions about the structure or learn more about my creative process, I have a newsletter you'll enjoy. It comes out 4 times a year and includes updates on my personal projects, answers to subscriber questions, and expanded insights on topics I cover here on YouTube. If that sounds interesting, subscribe using the link below. Okay, now let's move on to the story circle and see how it all ties together. The story circle is an 8-step framework, and it's all about the internal transformation of your protagonists or other character. Each step represents a phase of the character's journey, with a focus on how they change over the life of the story. So here's a quick breakdown of the 8 steps. You. The character starts in their comfort zone. Who are they? What's their life like at the beginning of the story? Need. Something disrupts their status quo. What do they want or lack? Go. They step into an unfamiliar situation. Search. They navigate the challenges of the new world that they've stepped into. Find. They get what they want, or at least they think they do. Pay. There's a cost for their success. Return. They come back to their old world, but change. They're transformed for better or worse. Let's look at a very simple example in a fantasy context. Maybe your protagonist is a farmer who dreams of becoming a warrior. They leave their home and join a mercenary band. They learn to fight and gain glory, and they achieve their goal. But they lose their innocence in the process. When they return home, they're no longer the person they once were. Or, for a better example, we can go back to our fake little story, Equations for Rain. We have 2 main protagonists, so let's do circles for the female that we'll name Elia and for the bull that we'll call Baro. Starting with Elia. You. Elia, born without tusks, is an outcast among her people, seen as weak and useless. She longs to prove her worth through her intelligence and mastery of magical equations. Need. A drought ravages the savannah, destroying the ecosystems and her herd's way of life. When a fire consumes her homeland, she clings to the idea that magic can make her invaluable to her people. Go. Elia sets out with Baro to find the spell that could save the savannah. The journey forces her into unfamiliar terrain where her intelligence must compensate for her physical disadvantages. Search. As she uncovers the intricacies of the equation, she learns it would allow the elephants to dominate their environment permanently. Meeting the wise beetle, who has adapted to the drought, introduces her to the idea that harmony, not dominance, is the path forward. Find. Elia prepares to enact the spell but realizes the cost, the loss of balance in the savannah's ecosystem, and the potential for irreversible harm. Pei, torn between the need to save her people and the wisdom of adapting to the savannah, Elia is attacked by Baro for hesitating. Wounded and desperate, she finds clarity in the beetle's wisdom and resolves to change the spell. Return. Elia successfully adapts the spell, transforming the elephants to endure the drought rather than dominate the environment. Her herd survives, but they reject her for what they see as betrayal, casting her out as the villain. Change. Elia finds peace in her exile, living in a sacred grove. She understands that true harmony comes from within and no longer seeks her herd's approval, embracing her role as protector of balance. And then for Baro, Baro is a strong and respected bull, firmly rooted in tradition. He believes in the herd's survival depends on dominance and control over their environment. His sense of duty drives him, but he's rigid in his thinking and dismissive of alternative solutions. Need. The drought and fire devastate the savannah, threatening the herd's survival. Baro feels the weight of responsibility to protect his people, and the spell becomes his only hope. However, this need blinds him to the potential cost of his choices. Go. Baro sets out with Elia to find the spell, seeing her intellect as a useful tool but doubting her broader vision. He tolerates her company, viewing her as an outsider whose worth is limited to this mission. Search. As they journey, Baro encounters moments that challenges his beliefs. Examples could be a drought-adapted animal, such as a scavenging jackal, thrives despite the harsh conditions. Baro scoffs at its smallness, but begins to see its resilience. The wise beetle also impacts Baro, introducing the idea that harmony, not dominance, is the true strength of the savannah. Baro dismisses this initially, but can't quite shake the idea. Find. Baro prepares to enact the spell, convinced it's the only solution. However, Elia's growing doubts and her arguments about the spell's ecological costs unsettle him. He begins to feel the weight of the moral dilemma: save the herd at the expense of the savannah, or risk everything for harmony. Pei. Baro's rigid mindset snaps when Elia hesitates during the ritual. Desperate and angry, he attacks her, accusing her of betrayal. But in the heat of the fight, her words and the beetle's wisdom finally strike a chord. Baro realizes that survival at any cost might destroy the very world the herd depends on. Return. Though weakened by the fight, Baro stops short of completing the ritual and allows Elia to change the spell. He still disagrees with her choice, but respects her vision. When the herd survives, he is hailed as a hero, but guilt over his actions begins to gnaw at him. Change. Baro grows into a more reflective and questioning leader. He realizes that strength alone cannot ensure the herd's future. The essence here is that character arcs hit the story beats of the overall plot, but focus on the growth of the characters, allowing me to unlock key themes. My overall theme of the story is about adapting to the environment versus adapting the environment. Elia's theme is about accepting that sometimes you're not part of the group. Baro's theme is about accepting that sometimes traditions are wrong. Their circles help me emphasize that and see when I have enough of their beats in the story to fill the novel. And I hope you can see how the story circles then flesh out the bare bones of the plot created in the Tentpoles, allowing me to take the two in combination and break the story down into chapters that build on the plot and the character beats. So when I use the story circle, I don't just create one for the protagonist. I create a story circle for each subplot and for each major point of view character. Even secondary characters who play a significant role in the story get their own circle. For example, for those of you who have read my epic fantasy series, herself has her own story circle across the entirety of the series because of her importance in the book and the role that she plays, despite the fact that she is never a point of view character. And if you're very curious about where Sangwil is going to go, book 4 will be out in February 2025. Let's take an example of a subplot though. Say you're weaving romance into your epic fantasy as a subplot. Just to clarify, I am the last person to give you actual romance writing advice. I'm going to talk about it here as a subplot that many people include, but all of my reviews say the world building's amazing, the friendships are cool, the parental relationships fantastic, the plot is great. The romance could use a lot of help. So don't expect me to ever delve into how to write a romance, because I clearly can't. Anyway, back to the subplot. Here's how it might follow its own story circle. The protagonist starts off skeptical of love. They meet someone intriguing, somebody who invites them to rethink their position on love. And they're pulled into this unexpected relationship dynamic, and this relationship becomes the strange new world in which they exist. And together, the protagonist and the love interest face challenges and learn about each other. They finally connect, but something threatens to tear them apart. Maybe they have to part ways because of the plot, or maybe they change how they see each other, and that changes them as individuals. And this approach works just as well for multiple point of view characters in a story. In a series like Game of Thrones, you could map a story circle for Jon Snow's journey in the north, Arya's transformation into an assassin, or Tyrion's political maneuvering. Each character grows and changes through their internal arc, even as the larger plot connects them. Using the story circles in this way ensures that every character has a growth arc. And for me, that's the key. If I'm going to follow a character's point of view in a story, I want them to change. I want them to grow in some way. And this outlining model helps me ensure that growth. The story circle also helps me layer my storytelling so that every subplot, every character plot, even the overall plot feels complete from the reader's perspective. And that's where the tentpoles bring everything together. The tentpoles provide the overarching guidelines into which this story circle slot, and the two combined create the North Star for my story, which I then break down into chapters and scenes, always keeping in mind where I want my story to go, how I want the characters to develop, and what I need from the subplots. With this approach, I can ensure that every aspect of the story, from the overarching plot to the most intimate character moment, feels cohesive and purposeful. It sounds like a lot, right? But honestly, it's not. It just looks complicated when you take it all together. Here is how you start. Define your protagonists. Who are they at the beginning of the story? Pinpoint their motivations. What do they want? What drives them to act? Plot their circle. How do they grow, adapt, and change throughout the story? And repeat. Use the same process for subplots and side characters, always guided by the overall tentpoles of your story. And it really is that simple. So, are you ready to give story circles a try? Are you excited to map out your tentpoles? Let me know in the comments what you're using for an outlining process. Do you have a favorite story structure that you swear by for all of your stories? Do you ever use a story structure to map out your tabletop role-playing games if you run those? If this video helped you, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell for more world building and storytelling tips and all the rest of that stuff. And if you'd like to support my channel financially and see how I've implemented these structures in my own writing, check out my epic fantasy series, Sangwell Chronicles, my science fantasy series starting with Magic Fall, or even my spicy novels set in a fairy universe. You can find links to all of those down below. And despite not being good at romance, I can apparently write spice, because those get good reviews too. But hey, if you're not ready to dive into my books, you can still support the channel just by watching another video. Since you enjoyed this one, why not check out my video on Show, Don't Tell? I think you'll love it. And I will see you soon for another episode of Just in Time World Building, where we build what we need, when we need it.